Today we're looking at the latest trade rumors heading towards the NHL trade deadline. Which three teams will Claude Giroux possibly accept a trade to? We get that information from a variety of sources. Plus we have the latest trade talk on the Maple Leafs, the Blackhawks, the Canucks, and apparently Vegas might have to go shopping for a goalie. Could they consider bringing back the Fleury? We'll discuss that possibility and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. First up, a couple quick items for some waiver wire news and some injury updates. First up, for the waiver wire, the Vegas Golden Knights have placed forward Adam Brooks on waivers here today. So of course, with Jack Eichel coming back, Mark Stone going to LTIR, they still needed to do some more configuring with the roster. So Brooks goes on waivers so he can possibly be reassigned if he clears. But of course, Brooks has been on waivers a couple of different times this year and has changed teams, resulting in that through the waivers. So we'll see if he continues to be on the move or if Vegas will retain his rights and be able to reassign him. We'll find out at 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. A couple quick injury updates. Senators' top defenseman and one of the top minute leaders in the NHL, Thomas Chabot, will not be able to participate in tonight's game. He will be out. Their last game against the Washington Capitals, he took a big hit from Tom Wilson. Doesn't appear to be anything too long term, but Chabot will be out for a little while for the Senators. And even though he's been out for a little while, we got further updates on Wild defenseman Matt Dumba, who it does appear like he's going to be out for a few more weeks with a lower body injury. So a couple of key defensemen out there for their respective NHL clubs. Now on to the rumor section of today's video. We have a variety of sources, including Colorado Hockey Now. We've also heard Elliot Friedman and Frank Saravelli talking about this as well. When it comes to Claude Giroux, we now have enough sources confirming it that we feel like it's pretty legit. Claude Giroux definitely prefers to go to the Colorado Avalanche ahead of the NHL trade deadline, but it looks as though he's given the Flyers and Chuck Fletcher a couple of other options as like a plan B. So while many people feel the Avalanche are the preferred destination, it sounds like he would also consider accepting a trade to either the St. Louis Blues or the Minnesota Wild. Now, we don't have any kind of confirmation or connection to say that the Wild or the Blues would be interested in acquiring Claude Giroux, while it's been pretty relatively obvious and apparent that the Avalanche appear to have interest considering the amount of heavy scouting going on between the two NHL clubs. You have to think that there's a real serious possibility that we could see that happen. We know the Avalanche and Joe Sakic have not been the type to go out and spend big on trade deadline acquisitions. Considering how good of a month of January they've had, arguably the top team in the NHL right now, you would think that there's an argument to be made that they don't really need to tinker a whole lot when you're doing that well and you're going such long stretches without losing or losing in regulation. Like, do you really need to spend to add? But at the same time, you have to look at everything and say, we haven't been able to get over the hump in the playoffs. They've had some playoff success, but not the ultimate success, and they've had a hard time busting through the end of the Western Conference to make it to the Stanley Cup final. So maybe Joe Sakic feels like he's still, one or two pieces away from being able to do that. So this might be the year that the Avalanche might spend in order to make that bigger acquisition, and Giroux appears to be one of their prime targets. Now, of course, Joe Sakic's been, like I said, pretty patient with this group. He's been pretty frugal in a sense with not giving up a ton of the futures when it comes to making playoff runs and trade deadline acquisitions. They still have a pretty decent group of prospects or younger players that are, just kind of getting early into the organization, into their careers. Draft picks are pretty good. I mean, they're in good shape. So this team certainly can afford to make one of those deadline acquisitions for sure. And this might be the year that Sakic goes out and spends to make it happen to give them that ultimate push. But with Giroux going, as we mentioned, it's probably going to take a couple of different pieces. There might even have to be a third team involved to retain some salary. It really boils down to money on the salary cap, and if the Avalanche do anything else to free up some cap space. But clearly that is going to be the hurdle right now. I don't think that's going to be the return package might not be as much of the hurdle as the cap space. So we'll see when this happens. But like I said before, I don't expect Claude Giroux to be traded from the Flyers anytime soon. I think he's going to play out real close to the deadline because he has his 1,000th game coming up, and Giroux's likely going to want to do that in a Flyers uniform. I think it's important to him and the franchise to have that accomplishment under his belt before he does move on. So we'll see what happens, but that's where things are looking. If things fall apart with the Avalanche, Claude Giroux could end up with the Wild or the Blues, but right now we don't have any connections to connect the dots to say that they're interested in pulling off a trade. Now, when it comes to the Blackhawks, we saw reports today from Frank Saravalli indicating that several NHL teams have expressed interest to the Blackhawks and forward Brandon Hagel, and they've made some pretty significant offers, and at this point, the Hawks have resisted and rejected those trade offers. Now, we don't know exactly who those teams are. I can understand the appeal. Obviously, he's a player right now having a pretty solid year, 14 goals, 13 assists. I probably view him as being like a middle six extra scoring forward who can, maybe kind of give you something like to the Lightning, like kind of like what they saw with Blake Coleman. Maybe that kind of player is kind of what I think some teams might feel he could be. At the very least, he's an extra insurance piece to add the extra offense on like the second or third line. But teams apparently are offering first-round picks and a prospect, and the Hawks up to this point have not said yes. So obviously they really value him. I know going into like last offseason, there was even some question marks over his future with the club, but I think now with all the changes that the team has been through, clearly the new leaders of the organization probably value him more than the old regime did, and there might be a better chance that he stay. But I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, as much as Hagel's a good player, that is something that we'll have to keep our eye on when teams really come calling on that kind of offer. It might be too much for them to end up passing up, but we'll see where that goes. I know another player that's been mentioned is Dominik Kubalik. Kubalik, as well as certainly made it known in a recent interview saying that he would be quite happy to stay in Chicago. Of course, they're the ones that gave him a chance and brought him to the NHL, so he kind of feels loyal to them, which is certainly understandable, but it's not quite clear what their intent is with him. Obviously, he did put up 30 goals, but, hasn't quite matched that production since, so it'll be interesting to see how they feel about him moving forward here as well. Now, the Maple Leafs continue to shop a couple of players, trying to free up some cap space ahead of the deadline. It's believed the two main players they're willing to move on from is Nick Ritchie and Travis Dermott. Of course, Ritchie's already been through waivers and passed and ended up in the minors, so that experiment's kind of been already stamped as failed, and they're looking to move on. There was reported last week that there was a few NHL teams expressing interest, so that the Leafs could actually trade him without either retaining salary or buying him out. I know there is some talk that he could be a buyout option. The Leafs are not able to move him, but of course that won't happen until the offseason, and it's something that they probably would prefer not to do because they need every little bit of cap space they can get their hands on. And of course, Travis Dermott seems to be the main defensive player that they're willing to trade in order for an upgrade in that sense. As I mentioned, I think they're looking for some Jake Muzzin insurance, so another defenseman who can play that similar style of game. I don't think they're overly enamored right now with Justin Hall. I mean, he has his moments, but over the most part, we've seen some rough times here as of late. I don't know if they really want to, spend the money in the prospects and the picks or whatever it's going to take to really upgrade that second pair. That's why it was so long that they were rumored to be interested in a player like Josh Manson, who would be a terrific fit, but it's not quite clear yet if Anaheim is going to move him or what that status of his contract and situation with the Ducks is going to be yet. So we'll have to see where this goes, but nothing really changed too much on the Leaf front. Same players that are in the mix. I have to think Dermott would be more attractive than Justin Hall to many teams, given the fact that he's a lot younger. But certainly, like I said, they're looking for mainly defensive help ahead of the deadline. Now, Vancouver media, including Thomas Drance and Rick Dhaliwal, are reporting that there is a link between the Canucks and reportedly showing interest in Rangers prospect who's looking for a trade for Vitaly Kravtsov. There's been a lot of separate talks and separate reports linking the Rangers to Miller, JT Miller that is. Not convinced, though, that it's necessarily the same linkings that we're going to see a trade involving Miller going to the Rangers that would send Kravtsov and some sort of a package to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, could that happen? Maybe. Well, we've heard Jim Rutherford say a variety of things here in the last couple of weeks. For one, we heard him say that they're a team that's not in the playoffs and they haven't really won yet and they're already, tied up against the cap. So they need to shed some money to get some flexibility. So that spawned a bunch of rumors of, well, who could go to create that? There's been talk about Miller, Garland, Myers, Pearson, and others. And now he's saying that he's, feels patient, doesn't really feel like he has to rush and do anything. But ultimately, as we get closer to the deadline, if nothing significant changes and it's looking like they're not going to be in the playoffs, I do fully suspect that the Canucks and Rutherford will subtract something or do their best to off that roster to give them said flexibility. Now, how will they do that? It's difficult to say exactly, but given the fact that the Rangers have been so interested in JT Miller, he does appear to be one of their top suitors. If they can come calling with, first round picks and the likes of guys like Kravtsov or Nils Lundqvist or something to that effect, or a package involving a few of those assets, it's going to be tough for the Canucks not to consider pulling the trigger. I'm not convinced they will, but it's certainly something they have to listen to and see if either having Miller or having these new assets make them better moving forward. It's just that simple, but I do expect Rutherford to do something. It's just interesting to hear the connection from Vancouver media suggesting that they are very interested in Vitaly Kravtsov, but even if Miller is not dealt, it doesn't mean a separate deal at a smaller scale could take place landing Kravtsov in the Canucks organization. So we'll have to follow that story and see where it goes. Now, as I mentioned as well, a big rumor today from Frank Seravalli regarding the Vegas Golden Knights and possibly having a reunion with Marc-Andre Fleury, of course, the face of the franchise, former Vezina Trophy winner with them, of course, who was abruptly traded out this past offseason and appeared to be kind of hurt by the process. Obviously, the player was like the instant fan favorite, the instant face of the franchise, and the first few years of that team's existence, he was the main guy. And then all of a sudden they trade for Robin Lehner. And then after a year of that, they need to cut salary. They need to get some cap flexibility. And he goes out the door and kind of felt a little bit betrayed, I think. But it is what it is. But now Seravalli's reporting that Robin Lehner does have an injury. Now, of course, we haven't heard a lot about it, but it's believed that he's battling a shoulder injury, and it's a torn labrum type of issue he's dealing with that will eventually likely need him to have surgery, and that could be something that he may not be able to get through the season with. It sounds like the Vegas Golden Knights are going to hope and try that Lehner can get through it, but as the longer the season goes and the longer they head into the playoffs, that's not a good thought. And Seravalli's reporting that the Golden Knights are definitely scouring the market for goaltending help, and that they've even expressed interest in a potential reunion with Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, of course, that might or may not happen. I mean, we know that Fleury doesn't technically have a no-trade clause, but the Blackhawks have said they're basically going to treat it that way, and they will only trade him with his consent, given the fact that he was really reluctant to even go to Chicago, considered retirement after the trade. And that was, a bit of a tough sell, but he did it. He's, been playing phenomenal as of late. And, would he want to be traded to a playoff team? I'm thinking it's probably a decent chance. Would he want to go back to Vegas? It's hard to say what his feelings are, right? I mean, we know that the Capitals pushed hard to get him and failed because he just didn't want to go there after being a longtime Penguin. I'm sure that was awkward for him and just something he couldn't bring himself to do. Would he go back to Vegas, though, as kind of almost like a savior, if you will, if Lehner will not be able to really be up to par? I mean, it's hard to take Vegas seriously as a Stanley Cup contender, knowing that Lehner is not 100%. It's likely going to get more tougher and tougher on him to battle through this as the season goes along. If they can't find goaltending insurance, they could be in real trouble. So we'll see what happens. Now, Kelly McCrimmon has put out a statement through another Vegas media member indicating that there's nothing to the rumor and that it's not going to happen. Of course, I hear GMs say that all the time. Realistically, he probably shouldn't even be commenting on it, given the fact that Fleury's not part of the Golden Knights organization. But regardless of that, you can't really say that something is going to happen or not happen as a GM, because I don't really take anything they say all that seriously, because they're not going to come out and publicly tell you what they're working on. They can't do that. For one, there's tampering rules, and secondly, they don't want other teams to know their strategies and what they're trying to do, right? So it's just plain and simple as that. But at the end of the day, if it's not Fleury, it should be somebody. They are scouring for other goalies, whether it be Georgiev out of the Rangers organization. If they would do a trade, they might look to Seattle for like a Chris Driedger, for example, or anybody else who might have a goalie that they're willing to part with here. Hard to say. I don't think anybody's going to be super happy to go and try to help Vegas. I mean, ultimately, they're a powerhouse, and if there's a weakness there, they're not going to want to do it unless there's a big return. So I don't know how this is going to work out, But this story from Sarah Valley certainly made things awfully interesting today, and certainly puts a little bit of question marks over the Vegas organization. And we'll have to wonder, I mean, it'd be quite a story to see Fleury return, and especially if they were to go on and win a cup or something. It would just be great entertainment, good story, although it seems less likely that it's going to happen with everything involved. So let me know what you think down below. Should Vegas pursue it? Do you think they really are behind the scenes? Where will things end up? Who would be a good goalie for them to chase after if it's not Fleury? Let me know down below. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.